Gary Burghoff was an absolute delight. He brought that great charm to Radar. The teddy bear, the cuddliness, the naivete.
Television history is filled with shows that became cultural landmarks, programs that transcended their original premise and burrowed deep into the hearts of millions of viewers across generations. But few shows have ever managed to do what MASH did, balance laugh-out-loud comedy with gut-wrenching drama, week after week, for 11 extraordinary years. Set against the backdrop of the Korean War, MASH was more than a television series. It was a mirror held up to American society, reflecting the absurdity of war, the resilience of the human spirit, and the complicated bonds that form between people thrown together by circumstance rather than choice. The cast of MASH became household names. Alan Alda, Wayne Rogers, McLean Stevenson, Loretta Swit, Jamie Farr, Harry Morgan, Mike Farrell, these were not just actors playing roles. To millions of devoted fans, they were Hawkeye, Trapper, Henry, Hot Lips, Klinger, Potter, and BJ. The characters felt real. The relationships felt genuine. And the humor, even when sharp and satirical, always carried warmth underneath. But here is the thing about television magic: it rarely tells you what is happening behind the camera. The smiles you see on screen do not always reflect the feelings simmering off it. And in the case of MASH, one particular dynamic has fascinated fans and television historians for decades. Several cast members, by various accounts, had serious problems with one of the show's most beloved actors, Gary Burghoff, the man who played Corporal Walter Radar O'Reilly. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain entirely. We are going to examine who Gary Burghoff was, what he brought to MASH, why certain co-stars found working alongside him extraordinarily difficult, and what was really driving that tension beneath the surface. This is not a story about villains. This is a story about complex human beings under immense pressure, struggling with ego, recognition, creative frustration, and the peculiar psychological weight that comes with embodying a beloved fictional character for years on end. Buckle up, because this is one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes stories in television history. To understand the tension, you first have to understand the man at the center of it. Gary Burghoff was born on May 24, 1943, in Bristol, Connecticut. From a young age, he displayed a natural gift for performance. He was musical, creative, and possessed an almost uncanny ability to connect emotionally with an audience. Before MASH ever came along, Burghoff had already made a significant mark in the entertainment world through his role in the original Broadway production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, where he played the title character, Charlie Brown. That performance earned him widespread admiration and gave early evidence of his remarkable ability to portray vulnerability and innocence with breathtaking authenticity. When the MASH film was being cast in 1970, director Robert Altman recognized that Burghoff had something rare. There was a quality to him, an earnestness, a childlike openness, that was almost impossible to manufacture through acting technique alone. It had to come from somewhere genuine inside the performer. Burghoff was cast as Radar O'Reilly in the film, and when the television adaptation began development, he was the only cast member from the original movie to carry his role over to the series. That fact alone tells you something significant about what the producers saw in him. On screen, Radar was a phenomenon. The character was the moral and emotional compass of the entire 4077th MASH unit. In a show populated by cynics, rule-breakers, bureaucrats, and exhausted surgeons, Radar was the innocent, the wide-eyed farm boy from Iowa who somehow managed to keep the whole operation running through a combination of intuitive efficiency and pure-hearted dedication. His teddy bear, his anticipation of orders before they were given, his loyalty, his occasional moments of quiet heartbreak. These were not just character traits written on a page. They were things Gary Burghoff breathed life into with a naturalness that made them feel completely real. Audiences adored Radar. Fan mail poured in for Burghoff at a level that rivaled, and sometimes exceeded, what the show's credited lead Alan Alda received. Children loved him. Grandparents loved him. Veterans who had served in real military hospitals felt they recognized something true in him. For many viewers, Radar was MASH, in the same way that Hawkeye was MASH for others. The character occupied a unique emotional space in the show that no other performer could have filled in quite the same way. But here is where it gets complicated. Fame has a way of distorting things. And the love that audiences poured onto Gary Burghoff did not automatically translate into harmonious relationships with the people he worked with every single day. To appreciate why tensions developed on the MASH set, you have to understand what the production environment was actually like. MASH was not a casual, relaxed shoot. It was an intensely demanding series that required its cast and crew to operate at an extraordinarily high level, consistently, over the course of an 11-year run. The show tackled themes that were emotionally exhausting: death, trauma, moral compromise, the psychological cost of prolonged exposure to violence and suffering. Even when the writers were crafting comedy, the comedy had weight. It came from darkness. It required the actors to go to real, emotional places. The shooting schedule was relentless. The cast spent long days on the Fox Ranch set in Malibu, which served as the Korean War exterior, often working in intense heat while dressed in military fatigues. The writers were constantly under pressure to deliver scripts that balanced humor and drama without tipping too far in either direction. Producers were managing network expectations, budget constraints, and the creative ambitions of a cast that was growing more confident, and in some cases more demanding, with each passing season. Within that pressure cooker, personalities inevitably clashed. Strong, talented, opinionated people do not always coexist peacefully, especially when they're spending more waking hours with their coworkers than with their own families. Add to that the combustible mixture of differing levels of public recognition, differing contract arrangements, and differing degrees of creative input into the show, and you have a recipe for serious interpersonal friction. Gary Burghoff, by multiple accounts from people who worked on the production, could be a difficult colleague. This is not an easy thing to say about someone whose screen persona was so thoroughly associated with gentleness and warmth. But it appears that the distance between Radar O'Reilly and Gary Burghoff was, at times, quite vast. Wayne Rogers arrived on MASH to play Captain Trapper, John McIntyre, Hawkeye's best friend and surgical partner. Rogers was a confident, intellectually formidable man. He had studied at Princeton, held strong opinions about creative direction, and was not the type to quietly accept situations he found frustrating. His relationship with the show was already unconventional in that he reportedly never signed a formal long-term contract, giving him a degree of independence that was unusual for a series regular. Rogers and Burghoff did not get along. The reasons were reportedly rooted in personality conflicts as much as anything professional. Rogers was direct, sometimes blunt, and did not have much patience for what he perceived as unnecessary difficulties on set. According to accounts that emerged in the years following MASH's original run, tensions between the two men escalated during production to a point that went well beyond ordinary disagreements. The most dramatic incident involved Rogers reportedly losing his temper during a scene and throwing a chair in Burghoff's direction. McLean Stevenson played Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake, the lovably bumbling commanding officer of the 4077th during the first 3 seasons of MASH. Stevenson was an affable, humorous man in real life, someone who genuinely seemed to enjoy the camaraderie of ensemble work. But his relationship with Gary Burghoff, by his own candid admission, was anything but straightforward. Stevenson described his dynamic with Burghoff as a love-hate relationship. That phrase is interesting because it suggests something more nuanced than simple dislike. It implies moments of genuine warmth alongside moments of real conflict, a push and pull dynamic that neither man was entirely responsible for creating. Stevenson was notably honest about this in interviews, acknowledging that the friction between them was not entirely one-sided. He openly stated that there were times when he himself was the difficult one, and other times when Burghoff was. This kind of mutual accountability is rare in Hollywood accounts of behind-the-scenes conflict, where the tendency is to cast one party as the villain and the other as the victim. What Stevenson's description suggests is that Burghoff's difficult moments were not necessarily calculated or malicious. They may have reflected genuine personal struggles, emotional volatility, insecurity about his place within the ensemble, or simply the strain of portraying such a psychologically demanding character over an extended period. Acting, particularly in a series that required the emotional depth MASH demanded, takes a real toll. The line between the performer and the performance can blur in ways that are psychologically disorienting. Stevenson himself left MASH at the end of Season 3, in one of the most memorable and emotionally devastating moments in television history, when Colonel Henry Blake's helicopter was shot down over the Sea of Japan on his way home from the war, a shocking story twist that the producers kept secret from most of the cast until they filmed the scene where the news was announced. Stevenson's departure, like Rogers's, reflected broader dissatisfactions with the show rather than any single relationship. But his honest account of his complicated bond with Burghoff adds important texture to the larger picture. If the conflicts with Rogers and Stevenson were significant, the tension between Gary Burghoff and Alan Alda carried a different weight entirely because of who Alda was within the MASH universe. Alan Alda was not merely the lead actor on the show. He was its creative conscience. Over the course of MASH's run, Alda became increasingly involved in writing and directing episodes, eventually co-writing and directing 31 of them, including the legendary series finale. He won Emmy Awards in acting, writing, and directing for the same show, a combination so rare it had never been accomplished before in television history. Alda's centrality to MASH was undeniable. He was the face of the show in public, the voice of its values in creative discussions, and the dominant artistic force in the writer's room. This was both his great strength and, in the context of his relationship with Burghoff, a source of real tension. By various accounts, Gary Burghoff felt undervalued. This is not as surprising as it might initially seem. Here was an actor who had originated the role of Radar O'Reilly in the feature film, the only cast member to make that transition, who was receiving enormous public affection, yet who did not occupy the same kind of creative authority or public profile as Alda. The disparity between audience love and professional recognition can create a particular kind of resentment, especially for a performer as emotionally invested in his work as Burghoff clearly was. Burghoff reportedly felt that his creative contributions were not always acknowledged or taken seriously, and that Alda's dominant position in the show's creative hierarchy left little room for others to have meaningful input. Whether or not this perception was entirely accurate is difficult to assess from the outside. What is clear is that this sense of being undervalued colored Burghoff's interactions with Alda in ways that were palpable to others on set. Colleagues noted that their exchanges could become icy and sharp, professional on the surface, but charged with an undercurrent of mutual frustration. For Alda's part, the situation was complicated by the fact that he was simultaneously trying to manage the creative direction of an entire series while also performing the lead role in every episode. The demands on him were extraordinary. When a co-star's difficult behavior created additional friction in an already pressurized environment, it would have been genuinely hard to respond with patience and grace every time. Alda has spoken in general terms over the years about the challenges of ensemble dynamics and the importance of maintaining a collaborative spirit on set, but he has been characteristically measured in his public comments about specific personal conflicts. What we can say with confidence is that the tension between Alda and Burghoff was real, documented by multiple sources connected to the production, and rooted in something deeper than ordinary professional disagreement. It was about recognition, creative authority, and the psychological weight of inhabiting beloved characters over many years. It would be unfair and incomplete to discuss Burghoff's difficult reputation on set without attempting to understand the person behind it more fully. Gary Burghoff was, by all evidence, a genuinely talented and deeply sensitive individual. Sensitivity is an asset in an actor. It allows access to emotional depths that more guarded performers cannot reach. But sensitivity can also make the ordinary abrasions of professional life feel disproportionately painful. Burghoff has spoken in interviews over the years about personal struggles during and after the MASH